Hello and welcome to More Than the Score. I'm Tony Moaclair, joined by Troy Zantuck, a man who knows a thing or two about the history of the AFL, that and so much more. Troy, I think there's another vodcast in non-sport related stuff you and I could talk about, but for the moment, here we are, More Than the Score. How are you, Troy?
Oh, good to be with you again, once again, Tone. Episode 12. Can you believe it? We've made it this far.
Look, there were doubters. There was the deep-pocketed hedge fund who bankroll this, who meet our substantial appearance fees every week. They have kept the faith, and good on them.
I tell you what, others didn't, but the hedge funders, they've stuck with us, Tone, so we've got to be happy about that.
Amen. And we love the good work of Wall Street vulture funds. Now, Troy, we talk about some aspect of VFL, AFL glory days every week here on More Than the Score. We're covering off something that's become a bit more popular, and you would argue with very good reason, something that's kind of seen more often these days than it was, say, 30, 40 years ago. I'm talking about head protection.
Yeah, most prevalent, obviously, in this climate, Tone, with the concussion rule. But I'd like to take you back 30, 40 years to some of the absolute stars of the day that wore helmets.
Now, are we talking, I mean, the trailblazers of cranial protection?
Yes.
Fashion was not high on their list of priorities. And I'm going to veer off from footy for a moment and just see if you can remember Tony Gregg's early efforts with helmets that he'd obviously taken from a motorcyclist he'd mugged on the way to the ground.
That's right.
Not exactly the sort of thing you'd want to be sitting or standing for hours under a hot Aussie sun in, but they have evolved a hell of a lot over the years. They've got lighter, they're probably even better. But you are the man to tell us who the first player, and this is a question without notice, by the way, so if you don't know, there's no shame. Can you tell us who the trailblazers were in the VFL of helmet wearers?
Well, I've got some ideas, but just before we get there, Tony, you bring up the great Tony Gregg, Mr. Nutrigrain, doing the Nutrigrain commercials. As kids growing up, we all know that. And that white helmet, that was an SP helmet. You remember the brand SP? They had the bats, the gloves, and they made him a helmet. And it was a great target for one Dennis Keith Lilly on occasion. Yeah. It was like a homing pigeon, the ball. For Tony's helmet.
White, but it was a red rag to a ball, yes.
Yeah. But I digress, and I'll get back to the helmeted heroes of the 70s and 80s. And I'll kick us off with, and we've mentioned this guy in previous podcast, Tone.
Yeah.
One of the best rovers ever to play the game, a Fitzroy legend, a 5-time best and fairest winner, pound for pound, in my opinion, in the top 5 rovers ever to play the game. He wore number 29 for the Mighty Roys. I'm talking about Gary Wilson.
Gary Wilson said, okay.
Gary Wilson.
Now, what sort of helmet are we talking?
It was like a bicycle helmet, the one that Gary wore.
Now, in later years, I'm keen to know, obviously, after the playing career has ended, and look, we won't go through the players, but we know who they are. Some are currently involved in legal action against the league. But players, anecdotally, retired players talk about the cost of concussion. Those who wore helmets, did it actually do what it was supposed to do?
Well, I think, and a lot of these players that we mentioned, massive courage. That was the thing. They had courage in bucket loads.
Yep.
And a lot of the guys sustained head injuries, obviously the concussion, and were forced to then wear the helmet as an aid for protection. So these guys that we're going to mention, their courage was way off the charts.
Amen. Yep.
So I'm kicking off with one of my favourite players. I'm being a bit self-indulgent here, but a guy I reckon nearly equal with Gary Wilson wore number 14 for the mighty Blue Baggers. Yes. He was a member of the Mosquito Fleet.
Yes.
Rod
That'd be
Ashman.
one. Rod Ashman.
What a player. And you would have
Great
seen a
player.
lot of Rod Ashman.
Yep. Now I think he wore one of the. They were like the Tour de France ones. They were.
Yes.
It wasn't like a Tony Gregg number. It wasn't like a Gary Wilson number. I don't think it was. It was a bit more kind of low profile. And from memory, although I stand to be corrected, I can't remember anybody from that magnificent premiership era of Carlton. I'm talking 79 to 82, who was wearing headgear.
No, I would venture to say, Tone, you're right. And I would say Rod Ashman is the absolute standout.
Yeah.
Because as a kid growing up, I always remembered two of the great rovers, Gary Wilson and Rod Ashman, in the 70s and 80s wearing the helmets. Rod Ashman's record's incredible. 236 games for the Blues. A great goal sneak, 370 goals. And that surprises a lot of people. That is a lot of goals.
Yeah.
And he was a runner-up in the 1981 Brownlow, which was won by, obviously, Barry Round and Bernie Quinlan tying that year. So what a terrific player he was for the Blues, Rod Ashman.
Absolutely magnificent. I mean, when I think about Carlton in the 80s and helmets, I think of, well, not David Rees-Jones, but anybody within a 3-metre radius of him needing one.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Caused for evasive action with Rees in the vicinity.
Exactly. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely love the man. Great.
What a terrific player he was, Rees.
Absolutely.
Now, I've got another Carlton player for you.
Yes.
He stood at just over, well, let's say he was over 6 foot and nearly 7 foot. He was also a runner-up in the Brownlow medal.
You're talking Harry Madden?
Harry Madden, well done, Tone.
When did he wear a helmet?
Yeah, Harry Madden wore a helmet. He wore only for a brief period, only for a very brief period after receiving a head knock.
Yep.
And rattled him a little bit. So he was forced to wear the helmet. I believe under medical supervision, he was advised to wear the helmet. And the joke was that, who's going to get up there to rattle the cage? So,
well, I guess that concussion might explain some of the planning decisions he made.
I'll let you take that up with Harry.
Yeah, as a Victorian State Minister.
Yes, big Harry Madden. And what a terrific player he was for the Blues, Tone. He played 287 games, but he also played 45 for the Bombers before coming over to the Blues, moving to Carlton because obviously he had an older brother who could play a bit called Simon. And they were vying for the number 1 ruck spot. And Simon was just absolutely travelling beautifully at the time. And Harry carved out an amazing career with the mighty Bluebaggers.
He really did. I'll never forget the goal on the run in 1993. That was absolutely, God, what a moment! What a moment!
And we spoke about this guy last week. He was runner-up to this bloke in the 1985 Brownlow medal, Harry.
Yep.
Brad Hardy.
Yes, definitely. What would you say the most famous Footscray helmet wearer?
No, Brad didn't wear it. I'm just saying that we mentioned him in our Redhead show, in our long
we
sleeve
did too,
show.
yes. I thought Brad Hardy wore a helmet, but there you go. All right.
No, but I have got one for Footscray fans.
Yeah.
His name was Michael McKenna, and he was a courageous rover back in the 80s. He went to Richmond for a season, played 22 games there. He wore number 34 for the mighty Bulldogs, and then he went to Richmond. I reckon he wore number 30. But Michael McKenna, very courageous rover, suffered some serious head knocks, donned the helmet, and so another one of my favourites from the Brisbane Lions. Now you'll know this guy.
Yep.
A Norm Smith medalist in 2001.
Yep.
3 flags. Number 32 he wore on his back, and one of the most courageous players ever to play for Brisbane.
Absolutely. We're talking Sean Hart here, aren't we?
We certainly are.
Yeah.
We certainly are, Tone.
Now, can you tell me, Troy, off the top of your head, the three-peat team, how many players played in all three? I mean, obviously Voss, Brown, you know, those big stars, but there may be more second-run players who were good enough to play in all three? Or
Yeah,
how much changed was the team?
well, over those 3 years, hardly any.
Okay.
The core of that team was quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
And as you said, you know, superstars right, left and centre, you know,
Yeah.
Voss, Lappin, Ackermanis, Brown, Mel Michael, Justin Lepich, Darryl White.
Yeah.
You know, I could go on forever.
Yeah.
The Scotts, the Scott brothers.
Yep.
Yeah, just an incredible Martin Pike.
Now, Sean Hart, am I right in remembering that he was a devout Christian?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
or it probably still is, don't get me wrong. Yep. But I remember, I mean, it's stuck in my mind. It's not often that somebody, I think, as he accepted the Norm Smith, he thanked Jesus or God, and you don't see that too often. So that tends to stick in the mind. And I noticed that despite as a Christian, he should have been relying on heavenly protection, but just as a I don't know, a little bit of extra insurance. Also, well, the helmet as well. You can't blame him.
You can look at it this way, Tone. That helmet may have been his halo.
Thank you. Well said.
Much like that light at the back of you, mate, glowing off your bonds.
Bless you, my son. Yes.
So we've covered off some great names. Now, I'll cover off some guys who... Actually, I'll mention this bloke. Another one of my favourites. He played at 4 clubs. He wore number 44 at every club he played for.
Oh, okay.
Played 283 games all up and 574 goals he kicked.
Okay. You'll have to keep going.
Blonde hair. Real fan. The girls loved him.
Yes.
He come onto the scene in the early 80s. He was from Bulleen Templestowe. Started his career with Fitzroy. Richard Osborne.
Oh, God,
Aussie.
yes. Yes, okay, so the clubs he ended up playing at, he played at Footscray?
Yep.
That's the,
Yeah, so we've got Fitzroy, Footscray.
Fitzroy, Footscray. I'm thinking Essendon, but I know that's wrong. I know it wasn't Carlton.
No, he ended his career at Collingwood.
Aha.
But the reason Richard Osborne wore a helmet for a period,
yep,
he played for Sydney. And after he played some great football with Fitzroy, he transferred to Sydney.
Yep.
And playing in a game in 1993 against the Cats, he was involved in a sickening collision. And there were fears for his safety. And an ambulance actually come onto the SCG and had to take him to hospital. It was just like that. So there were grave fears held for Aussie that day. But after he got the all clear and he come back, yeah, he wore a helmet.
And how long did he play for after that collision, Troy?
Well, he obviously started his career at Fitzroy. Then he went to Sydney.
Yep.
And then he played some really good football with Footscray.
Yeah, I remember that.
And ended his career at Collingwood. Wherever he played, every team he went to, he put the score on the board. He was an amazingly gifted player because he wasn't overly big. He was muscly. He was really well built, but he wasn't 6'4". I think he may have been 6'1", 6'1.5".
Okay. Did he reach 100 at any club?
No, he never kicked 100, but 574 goals in a career for a half-forward flanker. It's an extraordinary effort. So
he would have a full-time job just attending club reunions, wouldn't he?
I actually see Richard down at Middle Park with his lovely wife Natalie, and they're really good people, and a modest champ too. He's not one of these guys who rabbits on about how good he was, during his career.
I had thought if you could name a four-club player, and I think you corrected me on this last week. So
No, you were absolutely right.
Simon Minton Connor was a four-club player, wasn't he?
No, you're absolutely right.
And how many others are we talking about in the modern era? How many could you name who had played at four clubs, Troy?
Well, we might do that in an episode. We'll do
plan.
3 and 4 club players.
Great plan.
How does that sound?
Yeah, I love it.
Dale Kickett played for 5 clubs.
I had no idea.
And do you remember a guy called Mark Aythorne?
Yes, yeah, played for Carlton.
Spot on. Yep. So he played at multiple clubs as well. So
okay.
I reckon that's for another episode.
All right, definitely.
All right, so just quickly, Phil Narkle wore a helmet very much like a spaceship, like a spaceman's helmet. It was obviously the St Kilda colours of red, white and black.
Yep.
And he won the 82, I think he won the 82 Sandover medal. He come from Swan Districts, massive raps on him.
Yep.
But he just didn't fulfil his potential, I believe, when he come over to Melbourne. He finished his career at West Coast. There was another guy who come over with a big reputation from Western Australia called John Hutton. John Hutton was a smaller sized full forward, but a great pair of hands and a very reliable kick. The only thing with John, he didn't play at successful clubs. So he started his career with Brisbane, then he went to Sydney and he played with Freo also. But he was helmeted. The helmeted John Hutton, that's how he was described during the commentary.
Okay. Well, that alliteration is a gift to any commentator, isn't it?
And just quickly, I'd be remiss of me to not mention this guy, but the goal-kicking machine from Hawthorn wore a helmet.
Yes, tell us the circumstances about that, please, Troy.
It all gets back to one day at VFL Park, and we're talking about Jason Dunstall.
Yep.
I reckon the year was 1990. It was at VFL Park. He was diving for a mark, and he come across the knee of one Earl Spalding.
Oh, are we talking a Melbourne Earl Spalding or a Carlton Earl Spalding?
No, we're talking Melbourne at the time. Yep. Earl was playing with the D's, and Dunstall sustained a fractured skull. Incredibly, he was back playing, I think, only weeks later.
Yep.
And he wore the helmet, and you may remember he grew a beard.
Yep.
With the helmet. So he cops a lot of flack for that fashion statement, the helmet with the beard at the time, Jason. But what a terrific player. And just to show the courage to come out after sustaining such a serious injury. I think he kicked over 80 odd goals that year, and he missed quite a few games. So, again, 1254. They're the number of goals he kicked during his career. One of the absolute greats. Nathan Burke also was helmeted.
Yep.
He St Kilda stalwart, 323 games for the mighty Saints. A mate of mine actually wore a helmet for not the whole of his career, but at times. Greg Healy, the brother of Gerard Healy.
Oh, yes. Yep.
Former Melbourne captain, played 141 games for the D's, won 2 best and fairest, one of the most courageous small men for the D's. He was terrific. Luke Ball wore a helmet at one stage. And Jason Daniels, who you remember playing for St Kilda and Sydney.
Yep.
Jack Daniels wore the helmet on occasion.
Well, look, I think we know that there is, as I said, a growing awareness of the damage of concussion, multiple concussions. You only need to speak to Michael Tuck about the 1989 grand final. He can't remember any of it because of the concussion he got.
Well, Johnny Platten can't remember any of it either. He sustained a serious knock. And obviously when they were presenting...
That's what I meant. Sorry, I got that wrong.
But when they were presenting the medals, Tone, and Johnny Platten got back and he just didn't understand what was going on. He just couldn't remember anything. So,
well, Tony Wilson tells a great story of a conversation that that somebody was having with Johnny Platten in the rooms, and he just had no idea where he was. And that I'd love to know how long it actually took him to get over that concussion, because it sounded like a really serious one. But look, if they've got to wear helmets, then so much the better. And it's given us plenty of fodder to talk about today on More Than the Score. Troy Zantuck.
Yeah, it just goes to show what a dangerous game Australian rules can be, Tone.
Well, like that's a really arresting story of Osborne with an ambulance on the ground.
Yeah,
that really underscores, just how just how courageous some of these players are and how dangerous the game is. But we love it. That's one of the reasons that we love it.
When
physical jeopardy,
you need to heed this warning that any guy who runs out onto an AFL ground, never doubt their courage.
I couldn't agree more with that. I really couldn't.
These guys are, terrific athletes, and, the courage it takes to run back into a pack, not knowing what's coming the other way, that's massive. That's huge.
You've reminded me of going to a Carlton practice game. This was in about 1994. It was a summer's day. It was at Princes Park. Lance Whitnell was running backwards with the flight of the ball and back into the pack. The sun was in his eyes, and at the last minute, the ball spilled from his grasp, and a football Einstein behind me just turned and said, "That's the problem with Whitnell. He's too soft."
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. Yep. So he just, that bloke had just arrived from a Mensa meeting, obviously. Yeah.
Right. You'd notice he wasn't on the paddock backing into a pack with the sun in his eyes.
Exactly, Tone.
He was doing the brave job of criticising from the safety of the stands.
Yeah, with a pie in hand and a VB. Yeah, it just says it all, mate, doesn't it? So I salute our helmeted heroes today on episode 12 of More Than the Score, Tone.
You're an absolute superstar, Troy Zantuck. Well done. Great research as per usual. It's a pleasure to do this, and we'll be doing it again next week.
We will.
Thank you, Troy Zantuck. I've been Tony Monclair, and look, by all counts, I should be next week as well. We join us here on Isolation TV for More Than the Score.